So good morning and welcome to the October meeting of Somerset Council Executive here at the John Meikle Room at Dean House, Taunton. I would like to remind you it's only Executive League members present in the room that are taking decisions at this meeting. Others are in attendance and are here to provide advice. There are no planned fire drills today, and so in the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs and congregate in the car park. If anybody present might need assistance exiting the building, please let one of the Democratic Services team know. So the agenda and papers have been published on the council website in advance of the meeting, and we recognise the importance of striking a balance between providing opportunities for the lawful expression of views and any unacceptable behaviours or actions that cause disruption, which will lead to our meetings being adjourned. The council will be making a recording of the meeting and this will be published in due course. We are using a hybrid format for this meeting. Those executive league members and key officers are here physically present in the John Meikle Room. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or just observe. And the meeting is being broadcast and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. Those of you who are online, please could you follow the following protocols. Can you use the meeting chat function only for the purposes of the meeting? If you wish to speak, can you raise your hand if you're able, but or place a comment in the chat, preferably raising your hand. And could you say your name before speaking? It's important to turn microphones and cameras off when not speaking so that we are able to facilitate the bandwidth that we need to run the meeting in a hybrid format. Okay, do we have any apologies for absence? I have Councillor Mike Rigby, who is attending a meeting in Henstridge with some residents and the Member of Parliament for that area. And I believe Councillor Graham Oakes, those of you who aren't aware, he was taken ill a few days ago and has been in and out of hospital, and he sent me a message saying he is on the mend and following doctor's orders. So presumably the doctors have ordered him not to come here. We obviously wish Graham every good wishes for a speedy recovery. Okay, we have item 2, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of August 2024. Are there any comments on those minutes, please? Councillor Lisham.
I've just noticed, Chair, I think the 5th of August is wrong. I think the bit below it, meeting held on the 2nd of September, is correct.
Oh, so correct.
It is the September meeting.
You are right, there is a typo.
Just to say that I'm satisfied with the corrections that are identified in the minutes to errors on the papers that we identified on the 2nd of September. So I'm happy to propose those minutes.
Oh, apologies, I must have knocked it off by mistake. Okay, so apologies. That was proposed by Councillor Lisham, seconded by Councillor Wilkins, clearly carried, and I have duly signed the minutes. Okay, so we move on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from any members of the executive? Not seeing any, which moves us on to public question time. We've got 2 public questions today, one from Mr. Daniel Mumby, who I believe is online, and one from Brenda All, who is in the room. So we'll go to Daniel Mumby first. Are you ready, willing and able, Daniel?
Certainly am, Bill. Morning, everyone.
Good morning. You have 3 minutes, and that is a flexible 3 minutes, as we've already got 2 public speakers today. But don't take advantage, Daniel.
No worries. So, following reports in the national press regarding the future of the Willowman sculpture near junction 23 of the M5, can you please provide clarity on the following points? There was a quote in the ITV News article saying that it would cost £1 million to repair or replace the sculpture. How was this figure derived? And is the council exploring whether Section 106 or SIL funding can be used either from the Gravity site or other developments in the wider Bridgewater area? I have 2 supplementary questions, which are as printed, but I'm aware that you can only answer 2 in public questions. So I'm happy to take those as read and receive a written response for the remainder. But I would appreciate a response to those first 2 points. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And under a minute, so I'm particularly impressed. You can have a gold star for that one. And Federica.
I'll try and keep the reply to under a minute. So in relation to point 1, Daniel, this is an indicative outline costing provided by the artist and fabricator for construction of a new 15-metre sculpture. It does not include the wider costs which may be necessary, such as land acquisition, planning and procurement costs, which might need to be incurred depending on who were to take forward the delivery of any new sculpture. And then in relation to your second question, we have explored funding options such as Section 106 and SIL funding. However, they're generally for infrastructure that is necessary to enable new development to take place and to manage the impacts of new development. The council does not hold any Section 106 or SIL funding that can be used for this project. And we'll get to you a written answer in relation to questions 3 and 4.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Daniel. And moving on to Mrs. Orr.
My name is Brenda Orr. I'm a retired secondary teacher with 40 years of experience. I bring my values and educational ethos as a teacher here today. I am asking for a governance review in your forward plan to address deficiencies in the unreasonable customer policy, a review of when and how vexatious allegations can be made, a review of when and how individual service users can be named across the organisation. You are the elected members. You are in charge of policies, values and behaviours in this new council. I do not believe in a commissioning council with key services being outsourced or privatised. I voted for a change to the old policies and values of the former county council. I am disappointed that we aren't seeing much change to date in this council. Is this due to inheriting from the county council an officer corps that is inculcated in the commissioning council culture? The unreasonable customer policy is applied by officers without any of you approving it or exercising proper oversight. That cannot be good governance and wouldn't happen in any school in which I worked. Should the executive councillors for the related portfolios approve any unreasonable customer designations before they are applied? To protect a council policy position, is it acceptable for officers to have the power to potentially silence citizens with genuine concerns through the possible misapplication of the unreasonable customer policy without your elected oversight? Does the unreasonable customer policy require an executive councillor's approval before the individual is named and identified to all councillors and/or to staff via managers briefing them? Does the individual alleged to be an unreasonable customer have the right to see what has been written about them to all councillors and/or managers and their staff, or is it acceptable for that to be hidden from them? There is no vexatious policy in this council. Why not? When vexatious allegations are made but kept hidden from the alleged unreasonable customer, what redress do they have by policy to restore their good name and character? If the claims of vexatious behaviours were erroneously made, would the redress correction go to everyone previously informed? The local government ombudsman describes the huge imbalance of power when a large council alleges vexatious behaviours against a single individual. As a teacher, I would caution this council to be very careful about the application of vexatious behaviours, as it could be seen as bullying and intimidation, especially when controversial public policies are involved. I ask for your assurances today that the issues I have raised will be fully addressed.
Thank you, Mrs. Orr, and you were dead on 3 minutes, so that was particularly impressive. Can I also thank you for your service, your time as a teacher in this county? I managed 25 years as a secondary school teacher, so I can only take my hat off to you for the 40. I believe Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts is going to start this response, which she's looking at me with surprise.
I've got it being in your name rather than myself, but I'm happy to give the response. So,
You have the response handy. In my notes, it says that you're responding.
yeah, no problem at all.
My apologies if there's any confusion.
That's okay, not to worry. So thank you very much for your statement, Brenda. The council, its administration and officers are committed to transparency and openness. The policy is not used to make judgment about the character of our customers. It is used to assess the impacts of customer behaviour on staff and their ability to deliver services. We always welcome feedback. I'm really grateful for you coming along this morning on all aspects of what we do as a council. I can confirm that the managing unreasonable customer behaviour policy is currently under review and that it is anticipated to come before executive for approval in the early part of next year. I will ensure that your views and feedback that we've had this morning are taken into account in this review. It is the role of members to agree the policy, and it is then for officers to ensure that it's applied on a day-to-day basis. And at this point, I'll hand over to Alan to provide more detail.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Thank you, Councillor Smith-Roberts. So where measures are put in place, it does not follow that the Council views the individuals concerned as unreasonable or vexatious. Rather, just the behaviour being displayed at the time is unreasonable and or unmanageable. On occasions, this might be in the form of abusive, offensive or threatening behaviour, but the policy also covers behaviour such as the unreasonable persistence and or demands that may come through. You question the governance around unreasonable customer policy and whether officers should be making decisions. For clarity, the policy refers to managing unreasonable customer behaviour. Officers aren't labelling customers unreasonable. They're deciding how to handle the customer behaviour that affects the staff and their ability to do their jobs. The policy doesn't silence citizens, but seeks to manage certain behaviours. The measures depend upon the behaviour, but the communication routes remain open for all customers. Customers can take concerns to the local government ombudsman who assesses matters impartially, and the council cooperates fully with the inquiries. It should be noted that any measures that are put in place do not affect the customer's democratic or legal rights. Decisions under the managing unreasonable customer behaviour policy are taken by a senior officer, a head of service, for example, and there, of course, is a right of appeal, which is often considered at director level. As you correctly state, there are no vexatious policy in the council. This is because, as stated above, we are not concerned with making the judgment on the character of the individuals, but simply how to manage their behaviour. Implementation of measures under this policy is not in any way intended to sully an individual's name or reputation. No judgment has been made on an individual, only the behaviour being displayed and how best we can manage this within the resources that we have. Customers have the right to see information held about them under the provisions of Article 15 of the UK GDPR Act. We note your comments regarding the Ombudsman's caution around vexatious behaviours. Measures are often put in place to simply help the council manage the volume of correspondence and to ensure that it's routed to the right staff, members and considered through the right processes. In these circumstances, the council would not prevent communication with the council, but ask that it be directed through a specific inbox. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And can I just check that both public questions will get a written response as well, so that you'll be able to check back. Okay. And that brings us on to the executive forward plan. Any comments or questions from members in the room? Okay, nothing from executive members. Any other members in the room or online? Not seeing any. So we are requested to note the forward plan, which we duly have. Moving on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the 2024-25 General Fund Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, month 4, which is pages 17 to 60 on your hymn books. And I'd like to ask Councillor Liz Lysholm to introduce the item.
Thank you very much, Chair. This paper, following the Q1 paper and the outturn paper for the revenue budget that we saw last month, 2nd of September, gave us perhaps a little room to breathe. This paper makes it very clear why we have no room at all for complacency. The Services Directorate's overspend of 8.4 million, and there is a 100,000 increase in grants, can only be reported as a forecast overspend of 2.3 million when the 6 million corporate contingency is applied. And it is far, far too early in the financial year for us to be thinking of applying the corporate contingency. So please, colleagues, look at the deterioration in this report from month 3, Q1, and understand why the spend control boards and our MTFS approach must continue, subject, of course, to executive approval of the recommendations on the next paper on this agenda. I do have a concern about how risk is reported in our finance papers and every other papers. And personally, I cannot wait until our use of the software Ideagen is such that we get an appendix for every paper, financial and every other way, where it is an extract from the software rather than something that is entered manually into the papers. So on page 22 of this paper, you will see 4 by 5 equaling 20 on risk. In the next paper, you will see 5 by 5 equals 25. That is my understanding, my belief. That is where we are, and that is where we will be until we prove different. So I would like at this point, Chair, to hand over to Nicola Hicks for more detail on month 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance. Councillor Lation's already spoken about the detail regarding the forecast overspend as detailed in point 2 of the paper. So I won't reiterate that again, but what I would say is this is a forecast at the 31st of July and not actually come to fruition yet. And I think the important thing is we do need to continue working with services to try and mitigate this forecast overspend where possible. I'll just pick out some key points in the paper and then hand over to any executive members who may wish to add further comment to anything I say in relation to some of the specific services. But just if we stay on the front page, bullet point 3, the details what's changed for month 3. So this is kind of a new addition where we've put into the paper the actual change from month to month, and you will see there that it mainly relates to 1.3 in forecast for strategy and workforce and £1 million for children's in relation to external placements, and that feeds into paragraph 4 there, which talks about the forecast overspend for the year. So you'll see that actually relates 6.4 now forecast for children's, families and education, and the 4.4 for climate and place, which we know from the previous month remains in relation to the waste. As we move down through the paper, table 2 on the top of page 19 shows the detail per service, and that's summarised for each of those in relation to the adverse or favourable variance in point 11. You will see, members will see at the top of page 20, bullet point 10, we just pick out there the fact that we would be in a much worse position if we didn't have that exceptional financial support in terms of the capitalisation directive there and the use of the earmarked reserves for the year, which was put in at budget setting. That is detailed in the table at the bottom of the table on page 19. I think a comment from scrutiny is that they would like that picked out a little bit more in the table so it's really transparent and shows the reader that we are using that for our budget position. And we're certainly not out of the woods in terms of our financial position. Bullet point 12 just talks there about the elements we're looking at to try and improve our forecast outcome and protect our reserves. I think the focus will also be on those services where we are showing forecast overspends for the year. Just moving into the appendices, just appendix 1, which is adults on page 25. You'll see there in the table at the top of that page, it shows various variances within the service. with immediate care forecast overturn mitigated by forecast savings elsewhere within the budget. So that's just something we need to be mindful of as we move through the year in terms of that forecast variance on the year. We mentioned before when we presented Q1 report that in this paper there's quite a lot of graphics in here in terms of residential placements, nursing placements, and one of the suggestions from scrutiny was around putting last year's figures in there as a line on those graphs. So the team are currently working on that so we can see the trend from year to year on there. So that'll come in for Q2 report. If we move down through to Appendix 2, which is children's on page 29, it talks there about the increase in external placements. And on page 30, it talks about how the forecast overspend in that area is mitigated by the contingency that the service had in place to help mitigate some of those potential forecast overspend there or higher volume than forecast. I think, again, another comment from scrutiny is they would like that picked out a little bit more so it's really transparent in the paper. So that's something we're just looking at there. I think the lead member for Children's may want to come in, but I think the important thing here is that they do have a transformation board in place and are looking at different ways to try and mitigate some of that overspend, and finance are working very closely with the service in that area. I think also the service have been impacted by the fact that we have had the delays with Homes and Horizon, as talked about on page 30 and 31, which doesn't help with the rising revenue costs. But I'll let Councillor Shearer comment on that if she wishes to at the end. If I just move on to education, which is on page 34, it talks about the high needs blocks. The table shows the decline in the forecast outturn deficit, which now is forecast to stand at 24.3 million. At the moment, legislation means that we don't have to have that on our balance sheet. If that changed and came onto our balance sheet, that would have a major impact on this council in terms of its reserves position. So I think that's something there we're just going to potentially pick out in the paper a little bit more going forward as well. If we skip over to climate and place, which is on page 44, we'll just pinpoint there, we just shows there the impact we can see with the waste contract there being the main driver. But I think we're going to work closely with the service again there to see whether we can mitigate that, especially as they were able to put mitigations in place in the prior year to improve their outturn position. And finally, just on Appendix 5 for strategy workforce on page 51, it just talks about the legal overspend. I would say the directive as a directorate as a whole, sorry, couldn't get my words out, they're hopeful they can mitigate some of that overspend by underspend in other areas of this budget, which we should see come through in month 5. But happy to take any questions.
Maria, I saw you move the microphone, and I thought you were about to add, or are you just getting ready?
If I can just add one point, it's important for us to recognise that we've got £35 million worth of savings that we're trying to deliver in this financial year, and there's a large proportion of those, about 25 million, that are in green, that are not affecting the forecast outturn because they're assumed to be delivering and therefore be delivered. So any swing from any of the savings that are currently in green, and I know they're not reported in this report, but they're in a prior report, and we will be including them in every monthly report that comes to the executive for transparency. But it's important that all savings are delivered so that we can ensure that our financial position comes in as close to being on balance as possible.
Thank you, Maria. I'm looking for comment from lead members. We'll go to Sarah first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a bit of a comment about the adults budget, which is showing a bit of an underspend at the moment. I think you should understand that you can't just swipe that and put it somewhere else in the accounts at the moment. And I'm sure that nobody thinks that who's in charge here, but certainly the reason for that is that we've managed to keep the cost of care down. We've set very strict targets for our beds that we commission, and that's a good thing for us. And it's because there is a slight oversupply in the county, which means that we can get the rates that we want at the moment. That may not continue. We've got a winter coming up that can often throw up more problems for us. And I just wanted to sort of explain why that has happened. We have actually got a slight uptick in people going into care at the moment, so that could mean that this changes. So I don't want people to think we've done it, because we haven't yet. Also, to just remind people that the savings from Newton Europe is already in the budget, in case they didn't know that. We've got good commissioning work going on, and peer forums keeping a tight rein on the spending wisely and carefully to get the right care at the right time for the person who needs it, bearing in mind, as I always say, that person is a moving target in terms of care, because their care needs change. At scrutiny, they raised the question about the cost of resi care being £801 a week, quite close to nursing care at £805 a week. But I just need to remind people that there's an NHS top up for the nursing care, just in case you think that they look a bit similar, but there is a difference there, in fact. So I just wanted to point those things out and say that, we are keeping as tight a rein as we can on what we do, but the market is moving, the winter will come, and we'll see what happens then.
Thank you, Councillor Wakefield. Yes, we read with interest the words underspend and adult services. However, we're very aware that that is a position that needs close monitoring and attention, and a difficult winter could have unfortunate consequences there. So thank you so much for that reassurance, and we stand ready. Councillor Shearer.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Nikki, for your introduction to the paper as well, in terms of the detail in the appendices. Just to say a couple of things. I mean, I've been in this room for this meeting previously and other meetings, and we're charting and being concerned about and continue to look at the increase in number of children coming into our care. It has kind of tailed off a little bit now. We're at the mercy of who presents themselves to us, but certainly having done the deep dive and work around the children coming into our care, we do understand it. One of the difficulties we have is not only are they coming in to our care age 10 to 15, which can be quite a complex age for any child, but they're coming in with additional vulnerabilities and exposure to serious violence and so on. And so come in with more needs that mean the places we like to be putting them, we cannot always get them in there. So we have to find special, maybe emergency places, and those places can take a while to actually move on. So although the numbers are coming down nicely, which is lovely, there's still a kind of a bulge, if you like, which we're still dealing with those children who are in our care, and the time it takes us to step them down into places we have. And I know, Leader and Chair, you're particularly concerned about fostering, quite rightly. The underspend on fostering is not a good thing. We actually want more, when an overspend on fostering and an underspend on residential care. At last indication we had was that there's of the 195, I think, in residential care, about 33 of those children should really be in fostering. But we don't have that fostering sufficiency either in our own internal fostering or even in our independent fostering agencies that we have to use as well. So we're working very hard on that. We'll bring to our executive information about that and how we took it to the risk and performance and budget board about how the issues we have around fostering and what we're doing to work to improve the numbers of foster carers. So we're very alive to it. I was grateful to Nikki for mentioning the transformation board that we're working on constantly or continuously, let's say, and also with the board, the sub board of that, which only looks at finance, and that's massively helpful for us to understand what our numbers are and keep a track of where we are. So it's not going in the right direction at the moment, but we're putting every effort into keeping it in that way. And I think the other thing is it's easy to think it doesn't quite matter, but it absolutely does. The dedicated schools grant is money which is passported into us from the government, and virtually all comes into the government and virtually all goes out to schools. We are running a deficit, and the deficit is increasing. We have our deficit management plan, which we're working through. But not only do we have this issue that we have until in theory until March 26 before the government actually wants us to absorb any deficit that we have this statutory override, as everybody does in the country. We obviously have to work really hard in order to keep that from increasing still further. But I guess what I wanted to say about that as well is there's also the education side and the social care side works hand in hand, in that keeping children in school is a protective factor for the child and a protective factor for our income or our costs going out from our income. So the work we're doing around the Education for Life strategy in the last year, but also the consultation work that's gone out now to say, how can we use our special education needs funding more effectively and fairly across the education system and hold schools to account and support them as well. Schools are not the enemy by any means. Schools do a marvellous job and we need them desperately, but to support them to keep their children in school, because all the time they're in school, they aren't, families are coping with them as they should do, and they're not open to exploitation or any kind of risk of violence. So all of the bits linked together, and we have to keep moving all of them forward at the same kind of pace or faster in order to bring these numbers down. I don't know if you want to say any more on that, Claire. Are you happy with that forgive me, I keep saying similar things like this in many rooms, but we keep the focus on it.
Thank you, Heather. And Federica?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight in relation to communities where we're showing that slight overspend, and in particular where you look at page 41 of the report, where we're highlighting 2 areas that are showing those pressures, particularly open spaces, due to a contract increase that was part of the unitary budget setting process, but I believe not built into that. And then in relation to the coroner's service, which is a statutory service that we are seeing the pressures in, and that I think will continue to be the case there. So it's just something for us to be mindful of as we build next year's budgets when it comes to that statutory service. I guess I've got a wider question that maybe it's for Duncan to answer, or yourself, Bill. When we look at our finances overall, we've obviously declared the financial emergency and we're working through that, and we all do business as usual at the same time, where we're trying to keep our services going. We hear from Maria in relation to the fact that we've got to keep up the pressure on ourselves to make those £35 million savings this year, whilst again juggling against business as usual. I think it's about, when does this become the norm, or what are we seeing in the general kind of national picture, whether that's from a political standpoint or through the LGA? Because ultimately, unless we hear central government change their views, it will forever be that we're battling against the tide of demand-led services in general, when it comes to both place and people not getting the funding that they deserve and need, yet prices going up. And I've seen you do brilliantly, Bill, at raising that on the national picture. But is that national picture's view now changing to help us? Because we sit here in October and about to set next year's budget, and I feel it will be Groundhog Day like last year in making some of the same decisions unless Labour government step up and help local government.
Thank you, Fed. Yes, we have on many occasions highlighted the financial situation that local councils all over the country find themselves in, and Somerset Council is in a particular situation, and we are doing everything we can to mitigate the impact of that on our residents and services. But it is ultimately a national problem and needs a national solution. So that is very much the focus of our lobbying attempts, working with all 7 of our members of Parliament who we've briefed on our finances, and also with governments as well. Colleagues will be aware that we will be seeing towards the end of October, a financial statement budget from central government, and we look to that for good news. There does come a point where any council that has responsibility for, particularly for social care, whether that's adults or children's or SEND, those costs of the demand keeps going up, and our ability to raise money is static. We need to find that from elsewhere in the system, and that is the huge conundrum that we face, and it's why I've called on many occasions for a cross-party solution to the broken model of local government finance and of social care. We cannot go on funding social care out of council tax. It is a broken system. Duncan, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Thank you. I think the question is this the norm? I think it has been for a while. By 2020, I think it was, councils were spending roughly 21% less than they were spending in 2010. It recovered slightly because of the one-off grants during the pandemic, but the net impact of government reductions in grants to councils since 2010 was £40 billion. And I say it recovered slightly, but a lot of those pandemic grants were one-off. So as they've been reversed back out of the system, we'll be able to see at the end of this financial year where we're up to right now. But just last week, the County Councils Network published a report saying that there was a £54 billion hole in local government finance by 2030. And if we keep going the way we're going, effectively most councils who've got caring responsibilities will become care-only authorities by 2030. So there is no additional money going into the system in excess of the costs of the system going up. So the difficulty we have is we're always trying to manage delivering services within effectively a budget which might be in cash terms larger than it was the year before, but the income's going up slower than the expenditure. So it is into that Mr. McCorber territory of we're spending more than we earn. Therefore, we have to actually keep prioritising within that pot what we spend it on, and we can't not take on demand-led services around things such as children, adults, housing, and a few other areas. So it just means that the things that actually local people really value as a whole community are the things that are more and more under pressure. So if you look at things like culture budgets and so on, as you well know, Councillor Smith-Roberts, they've been hammered nationally and most councils have had to reduce them significantly. Lots of the things that actually were about placemaking are really under pressure now. So I think that is the norm. I think it has been for a while. I think some councils have still got some reserves, which means they don't have to worry about it as much as others. We don't. So this is going to be the way it's going to be for a while. And unless something happens nationally, government don't have any extra cash either. They've got the same problem we've got. So therefore, there's not a huge amount I'm expecting them to be able to do this year at least. Maybe next year they might have found some different mechanisms.
Thank you, Chair. If I may come in, I think two things that are of great interest to me, and Councillor Smith-Roberts, Federica, you're absolutely right to raise this. For me, there are kind of two parallel tracks. There's the chronic situation. Think of it as health of a council. So there's the chronic situation where we know that social care is underfunded and we're using a property tax to try and pay for it, which is ridiculous. And then there's the urgent. And what is of interest to me is when something crosses from chronic to urgent. So we don't talk about the statutory override and the dedicated schools grant deficit. But if that were a personal overdraft and you just said, well, I won't worry about it, we'll soon be in really big trouble. And upper tier councils all across the country are soon going to be moving that one into the urgent column. It's not far away, that statutory override. It's been extended once already. This is not the first time we've seen that. And then there are other things, the other two parallel tracks, there are things that are within our control and those things that are outside of our control. And so whilst we work on those things that are in our control, we also have to be looking globally as well as nationally at those things that are outside our control and finding ways to react to them. And then finally, when I was talking to Maria soon after she started with us in Somerset, we were discussing the Barnett graph of doom. So for any of you in the room who have not yet Googled the Barnett graph of doom, have a look at it, because we're well past the point at which the income of councils and the costs of social care crossed. And we are well into that second half of that graph now. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Any more comments from lead members? Not seeing anything, so we'll go to questions from other members. I've got Jill Slocum online first and then Mandy Chilcott. So Jill, please.
Good morning, Leader. Thank you. And I totally agreed with your last statement that you made about the government taking more control, especially on adult social care. I'd like to talk just a brief, it's not so much a question, but it's about the adult services. I just would like to point out that we believe that there will be far more savings made on the discharge planning from hospitals. We've identified through scrutiny where a lot of people are being sent into residential or care homes and not being given the opportunity to have care at home, which would be a significant saving for this council and the government, quite honestly. So I would urge that all councillors are aware in their communities of anyone that they know who is languishing in a nursing home or residential home, who doesn't want to be. There is an opportunity for them to be cared for at home, a less expensive process and a much more caring one. And I think we're working really hard on this to identify these big savings. So I hope that there will be more savings identified on this budget paper for the next quarter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jill. And Councillor Wakefield would like to respond. Thank you.
I'd just like to assure Jill that we are doing everything we can to get people in the places they want to be. Sometimes their family situation is not suitable for them to go home. There may be an unsupportive partner or a situation that just isn't right for them. We do not keep people in places they don't want to be. And I think Jill has an example of somebody she knows in this situation, but that may be a special case as far as the family is concerned. But you cannot extrapolate for that and say we don't get people home. We do get people home. Our whole aim of our team is to keep people at home, to make it possible for them to go back to home, and we do that as much as we can. And we're making sure that pathway 1 out of hospital is the one that most people go on. We know that anyway, but more people go on it. We've got our Somerset Independent Living Centres to help people with the gadgets they might need at home. We are doing everything we can. I do not think she is correct in what she is saying.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Mandy Chilcott, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the paper. And I welcome some of the graphs in. Actually, it's really nice for some pictorial explanation as well as what can be wordy documents. So just a couple of points to raise, if I may. So firstly, I thank you for the clarity that this budget has been set using 36.8 million of reserves and a capitalisation of 36.9. That has appeared in the bottom of the table on page 19. And I think I did bring it up in scrutiny. It'd be nice to have a bit more dialogue on that sort of below that. And I think it was agreed that that could be taken on board. So in looking at the budget before us, effectively, this budget has been set using £73 million worth of funds that this council does not currently have. Like I said, it's been a one-off out of reserves and a capitalisation. So we know there's a huge amount of work going on this year, which is positive. But my question would be, firstly, around the interest and debt figure. So last year at year end, the very last month of the year, there was a big swing, and a lot of that movement was due to that non-service interest funding debt, interest on savings. I note there's already a difference in this paper. So my question is, if that continues into the next few months, will that be adjusted so there's not a great big swing right at the end of the year? Thank you. First question.
Okay, Liz is going to come in first and then Maria.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that we do have the reserves and we could not have set a legal budget if we hadn't had those reserves. I completely accept and understand they can only be spent once. And the last thing we want to do is be running down our reserves. However, setting that budget in the way we did, we gave ourselves 1 year to create a viable and then a stable budget. And we did that knowingly using the reserves and the capitalisation directive to be funded by sale of assets. So whilst it's a position that I don't think any council would wish to be in, we did it knowingly. And we did it in order to set a legal budget, though I accept your comments always about what is a legally balanced budget, what is a balanced budget, and the differences between them. So.
In terms of the capital financing, it's important for me just to highlight in paragraph 12 on page 20, one of the items that we're looking at is reviewing the capital programme and the profile of spend, including the reprofiling and any slippage that may be taken forward during the year. That will be reflected in the revenue budget as early as we know it, as it's happening. Obviously, there are capital programme items that could accelerate their spend that are funded by borrowing and therefore will have the opposite impact on the capital financing in terms of those schemes if they accelerate. In the next item on the agenda, I pick up on some of that. So if that's okay with you, I'll pick it up under that item.
Thank you. I'm aware it's there, but this paper sits separately. That's the question. And I thank you for further clarity on that, because I think from a public point of view, as I've said previously, and I'll keep saying, it looks that all is quite well, but there is that underlying picture which is starting to bring forward more about that sort of continuing pressure that's there this year and the next paper into future years. So I think there's a question from me around, we are seeing some overspends at the moment, and I would continue to look for more on the mitigation side. You know, it's really important that if there are issues within the directorate, that more mitigation is brought online, and I know that's difficult. I don't underestimate how difficult that is, but also we have to balance that budget. The other comment would be, as I think it's just been touched, that not every council is the same in the country. Not every council overspent at the last year, and not every council has had to pull hugely from reserves. So there is some differential around the councils in the country. I think for me, more openness, our public need to understand, because you have taken some very difficult decisions, and especially our staff, I think they all need to be very clear within the papers that are presented why those difficult decisions are being taken. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Liz?
I won't pick up on mitigations yet. I'll leave that to Nicola because she's really hot on that. She should be. I just wanted to pick up on not every council is the same. I think that kind of underpins what our leader says, that council tax does not work as a way of funding social care, because council tax varies from council to council. So there are historic factors which we've rehearsed endlessly, and there are situations where if you live on the Somerset side of the border, I think it was the last year's figure was something like £272 less on a Band D house on the Somerset side of the border than on the Dorset side of the border. But as we all know, borders are porous, and councils can work across borders when they're looking for social care placements. And so we have something that is inherently, in my view, unfair as a way of funding social care. It is broken, and where council tax income is lower, in places where the base is lower because you have more A, B, perhaps C homes, as we do in Somerset, where our average in Somerset is actually a C, it's not a D. And so we are constantly working within a situation that is financially unfair, broken, where council tax need is higher, the income from council tax is generally lower. And it is really unfair that people rightly see it as a property tax on the property that they rent or buy and live in. And so inevitably they compare what is around them that their council tax pays for. They don't do that with the National Health Service. And so for me, I'm sure for our leader as well, social care needs a national solution. And I don't know when any government is going to be brave enough, bold enough, or even have the bandwidth to cope with that. But if we don't, the Barnet Graph Doon will sit with us and become a greater and greater reality every year that we are in this situation. So I think I'm going to hand over to you, Maria, or to Nicola. Mitigations is Nicola.
Yeah, I'll just add that we have asked the finance business partners to work with the services to put a specific mitigation section in each of the appendixes. Now, I think it does talk a little bit about mitigations if I just pick on children's in the appendix. However, those things that Councillor Shearer mentioned about the Transformation Board, the Finance Board, that's not mentioned in the appendices and the good work that's happening there. So I think picking that out and bringing it into the paper, plus also the fact that we are going to be publicising every month the savings appendix to ensure we're on target for those and the mitigations for any that can't be achieved there. So I think that will get start to get picked out in the paper now.
Okay, I've got Diogo Rodriguez next on my list.
Thanks, Bill. Just my question really is around, well, for Councillor Shearer, around the external placements budget. And the report says there's the total overspend on that of 9.9 million, and it says it's because of the increased cost pressures, mainly around 10 to 15 age group, around serious violence and criminal exploitation. I think probably the same for everyone else, as I felt reading that, really sad, reading that particular line. And also I'm just thinking, what else can we be doing to support our young people? The impression that I get is, understandably perhaps to a certain degree, that we're reacting to a problem, firefighting almost, to the best that we can for those young people. I'd be interested to know, perhaps at a later point, if there are parts of the county which are more affected than others around this. I'd also like to know what specific measures are in place to prevent young people from getting into that horrible cycle in the first place. Is there more that we would like to be doing? Perhaps we can't yet do it, but we'd like to be doing more. And also, is there a role potentially looking forward for LCNs as well in this and working with young people?
Thank you, Councillor Rodriguez. Absolutely spot on questions, no problem at all. And more than happy to talk about it. You're absolutely right. We have been concerned about the level of need and exposure to exploitation, criminality in all of its forms for some of our children coming into our care. We also get particularly worried if children come into our care who we've not heard about before. And unfortunately, there are more of those than we would like. I think it is the truth. People coming kind of into our care later on we're not aware of. So there's all kinds of issues around that. The first thing I'd talk about is, and you'll be aware, forgive me, I'd like to look at you, forgive me. It's awful speaking to someone behind you, it's really bad. It's always, I'll talk to the mic. So yeah, so the one thing I wanted to mention straight off and came straight in was the joint targeting area inspection work that we went through in May, which we went through the inspection in May. The work is going to follow us around quite rightly for some time. This Friday, in fact, this week, we have, there's a large workshop going on really across the police, across the whole of their policing area. So everyone gets the learning from what came out of that inspection. You're right that we need to be ahead of this game far more. We're very good at dealing with those children who come to us, and we find what, as a system, we're not so good at is seeing what's we don't yet know. And that came out of the inspection quite clearly across the entire system. So that's with health, with probation, with police, with ourselves, all the youth justice side of things. So we are working madly at trying to join ourselves up better so we get ahead of the problem and see the problem as it comes and speak to each other across the system. And that will help massively, because you're right, we don't want any of our children either receiving, open to, perpetrating, doing anything around serious violence. We want to keep them out of that. And I go back to the thing about the work we're doing with schools, trying to ensure that we stop having that awful reputation that we have of having a very high permanent exclusion rate in our county as being, that's the outlier we don't want to have. We also don't want to have authorised absences. Not because we don't want people to take their kids on holiday, but because the authorised absences often cover a different truth, which means there are children at home when they should be at school, getting home education when really they should be being looked after, or stepped back into the school again afterwards. So we're working super hard on it, but it has to be a system approach as well as across all of our systems in the council. And you're right, on the local side of things, absolutely. I was in the scrutiny meeting when we were talking about that, it was raised, which is that there's a community space in this as well that needs to be filled, and we need to engage with our community to support us in all of this work. So yeah, you're speaking my language, Councillor Rodriguez. I really appreciate that. I don't know if Claire wants to come in with any more, but we are on the idea that we need to be ahead of it rather than reacting.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I was speaking to Ali Hart from Promise Works earlier, late last week at the Somerset Community Foundation presentation, and she was outlining how they have they don't have the capacity to provide mentors for those people who are getting referrals to. So very much, you know, the comment I made to her was, would you have 278 parish councils, which is a higher number than the waiting list that they have. And we very much can do that through LCNs and city, town and parish councils to be able to bring forwards that support for our voluntary sector, and also support all the work, the groups that work with young people in our communities, whether it's youth clubs, formed organisations, faith groups, sports clubs, and so on, who all do fantastic work, mostly dependent on volunteers. So all of that, I think, is something that could very well be explored through LCNs, and your point is very well made. Thank you, Tiogo. Moving on to Councillor Francis Nicholson online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make a minor point and then ask a question for reassurance. Adult services, children's services, all community services only work because everybody works together. The JATE I referred to just now, it's very clear that it's about all organisations, not just the council. That's the statement I want to make. Then the question, I want to be assured that there is not the same sort of pulling apart within the council, that all parts of the council are regarding adults, children's, highways, communities as part of the council, not to use the words which I've heard this morning, oh, well, to pick on such and such. That's what I feel very strongly we have to avoid, and I would like to be reassured that this is a one council approach, not a this director point a finger, that director at point a finger. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's the whole rationale. It's what we can do collectively to support all our service areas, using all of our levers to be able to make sure that we address the challenges that the council faces, and be reassured that we work with across the council, but also in step with our partners through the Somerset board and the other partnership arrangements we have to be able to deliver effectively for our residents. There's no pointing of fingers. It's always what more can we do to support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's really good to hear, and I look forward never to hearing again to pick on in any presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think for us as an organisation, we will be absolutely focusing on those areas that have got the forecast overspends, to give them the support so that we can try and pull back that forecast overspend, so we don't have to utilise contingency. We can preserve our reserves and start to rebuild our financial resilience and sustainability. I think the term that we'll use in future is for example, if we're using any examples within the report. But thank you very much for your feedback.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions on the budget monitoring report. I mean, for me, the thing that's have we got Sarah? Okay, Sarah, do you want to come back?
I just wonder, and I'm not as experienced as most of you are at this, about whether the actual recommendations or what we're going to in number 7 are actually strong enough. I mean, it says it notes the situation. Can't we say and the drive to keep costs down or something? I don't know. I mean, because it's more than just. Is it just our role to note it? Because each department is trying its best to keep costs down and to reduce them. I just wondered if it should be a bit stronger.
I take your point, Sarah. I think because each year MTFP, the plan, works under the strategy, which is our next agenda paper. We are working under that strategy that is about reducing overspends, protecting reserves, where possible, protect even the corporate contingency. So I think because the plan and therefore the monthly reporting comes under the MTFS, I think we are well covered on that. But I do take your point, and it's a report for noting, because as Nicola has already said, it's a forecast overspend. It is not an overspend until we get to the outturn paper. Thank you.
Yeah, I was looking down at the item 7 agreements. I think it's covered there, but your point is well made. So for me, it's really appendix 2, page 31 that I just wanted to highlight for members and for the public that there is and there remains an insufficiency of foster carers in Somerset. Councillor Shearer had the figure of 33 children who are in accommodation when foster care might well be a more suitable outcome for them. There is clearly a urgent need for more foster carers in Somerset. Most importantly, we know that finding a supportive home for a local child is the best thing for them, but the added benefit is that it saves our taxpayers money. We need to do everything that we can to encourage Somerset families to consider becoming a foster carer. We have an ongoing campaign at the moment, and this is your chance to change a child's story, have an impact on their lives and their future. So I urge everyone to spread the word by sharing details or adverts and our information events. And if anyone's ever considered fostering, please do get in touch with the team and find out much more about this hugely rewarding role. There is an income that is associated with it, but it also enables you to be based at home, and that may well suit many people. So I would urge members to share that with their city, town and parish councils, voluntary groups, anywhere that they think that we could recruit. And you know that number 33 has been mentioned. We could do with significantly more foster carers in our team than that to be able to meet the demands that we are seeing for those children who are particularly in need. So I would highlight that section of the report in summing up. Councillor Shearer, did you want to just come back briefly?
Forgive me, yes, and I don't want to steal your thunder because you make an excellent point, and I'm really grateful for you making it. I just wanted to say that I'd had a conversation just a couple of days ago with the people who are doing the marketing for us on fostering. I said if we could just have some bits of literature that we could easily give out to all of our members, then they could take those to their council, their parish councils. It'd be very easy to go into parish newsletters, just a tiny little bit of literature to do exactly what you want them to do, Bill. I was conscious you might be asking this question, so or making this point. So if we can get that for them, we'll share it with all 110 councils.
Yeah, I'm aware there's some amazing work being done by the team to recruit foster carers, and you know there's online advertising, there's radio adverts, there's all sorts going on. I just think there is that absolute political imperative that every councillor as a community leader should be pushing in their community to be able to find the right care that we can for those children who are most in need. Okay, we move on to the recommendation that we note the revenue forecast overspend of 8.4 million for the year, and note the council revenue forecast overspend of 2.3 million for the year. Do I have a proposer for that? Councillor Lasham, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. All those in favour, please. All those against, that's clearly carried. And so we move on to the medium-term financial plan and strategy 25-26 to 29-30, which is pages 61 to 74.
Thank you, Chair. I will not speak for long because I think colleagues right across the whole council will be wanting to hear from our still relatively new interim 151 officer, Maria Christofi. So Maria has updated our medium-term financial strategy and extended the medium-term planning period to 2029 to 2030. I can't get used to saying 2030 yet. The assumptions in the medium-term financial plan are also updated in this report, following on from the budget setting in February of this year and the update from our previous 151 officer in April 24. So 11 months ago, we declared a financial emergency, and the work continues to create a viable and stable council. So item 5 on pages 61 and 62 is a valuable list of the main actions undertaken. None of us expected this work to be painless. We did know it would be extremely hard, and that we had, as I've already said, just the one financial year within which to take the necessary actions at this scale to avoid the issuing of a Section 114 notice. So Maria has considered the budget gap for 25-26, and her findings, as she will tell you, are presented under 3 headings: low, central and high. Current work on the next financial year is taking the central position, but be aware, as I've already said, that can change due to circumstances that are well beyond our control. I also raise again the dedicated schools grant deficit, which is currently over 35 million and rising. That should not be understated. And as I've said, it will move from the chronic list of concerns for local authorities to the urgent risk list. And the fact that there's a statutory override should not give us any comfort at all. So if I may, I'd like to hand over to Maria, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So as we've already said, this is a medium-term financial strategy and an updated medium-term financial plan. It follows nicely on from the last time there was an update provided to the executive and to the public. There will be 2 updates each year that we will aim for. One will be around this time of year, so we refresh publicly the medium-term financial strategy and plan assumptions. And once again, when we set the budget and council tax in February. It is a live document behind the scenes because different assumptions will crystallise at different moments in time. New information will come on board, and we will be updating the working document as part of our work, and publicly we will bring it to you at a snapshot at those 2 intervals. It's important to highlight that in paragraph 4, the medium-term financial plans gap that was set in February 2024 and again in April 2024 highlighted that there was an almost £104 million gap in 2025-26, rising in the 4 years to almost £199 million gap. As Councillor Lation has said, I have extended the gap in this proposal to the executive to include a 5th year, so that we're working with a 5-year medium-term financial plan and strategy. Taking on board some of the comments that have been made, paragraph 8, front and centre, are the financial challenges that are facing the council. It makes explicit reference there to the 2024-25 budget that was set with one-off resources of the £36.8 million use of earmark reserves. And as we know, once we've spent those, they go, they don't get, we have to work hard to replenish them. And that means coming in underspent or planning to put more money back into reserves in order to build financial resilience and sustainability. And the exceptional financial support, the capitalisation direction of 36.884 million, which has yet to be confirmed to us, but we were planned for it within the budget, and that's how the budget gap was closed. And it's really important to remember we're talking about almost £80 million of one-off funding that has been included in the budget that we are currently working through. There are a number of objectives that have been included within the medium-term financial plan and medium-term financial strategy. The 6 are listed within paragraph 11 on page 63 for members. It's important for me to highlight some of the background information as to how we've arrived at this medium-term financial strategy. The former government only provided a 1-year local government finance settlement for each of the years in the last few years. And at the time of writing with the new government, we're not sure exactly what that finance settlement will look like, or indeed whether it will extend further than 1 year. So 1-year funding is a very difficult thing for local authorities to actively plan for the medium term, to know how to manage the pressures that they're seeing. There is no indication of council tax thresholds or indeed adult social care precepts for 2025-26 and beyond. However, we have made some assumptions within the medium-term financial plan. There are, of course, a number of pressures that we've been talking about under the previous item: adult social care pressures, adult children's social care pressures, and of course there is homelessness and temporary accommodation, inflation, interest rates, and the cost of borrowing that has been intensified over a long period of time. We can see that we have all of these challenges here in Somerset and that we are responding to them. And that's where I'll take you on to our assumptions. I've also taken into account the in-year position, the forecast outcome. We keep saying it's a forecast because it is, and it's not yet happened, and we have every opportunity to turn it around. I've made reference to it here because I've had to take into account what happens if we don't manage to turn it around. And I've made some provision within the medium-term financial plan for such an eventuality, even though I expect us to be working hard for it not to become a reality. And in fact, that assumption coming out of the medium-term financial plan when we next look at it. There are lots of uncertainties. Inflation might be low at the moment, but we didn't predict the all-time highs that we've had. Cost of living crisis, demographic changes and demand pressures. And of course, as I've already said, the local government funding. We also have the added uncertainty that we have a DSG deficit and the statutory override is ending in the next year or so, and we need to have that confirmed by government so that we understand exactly where we're going. I take members to table 1, which was the original budget gap for 25-26, and I'm hoping everyone can track this through, but if there are any questions, I'll happily pick them up and answer them. But these were the assumptions that were previously agreed by Executive and full Council. Lots of provisions for different areas, inflation, both non-contractual and contractual, pay inflation, an assumption around what demand and demographics might look like in the future, and an assumption that the medium-term financial strategy and annual budgets are based on all savings being delivered that have been agreed. So you can see that within those lines. There was also provision made for capital financing and the changing of the one-off funding coming back out. So that changing use of reserves and that capitalisation direction, those two numbers the budget gap increases significantly because they are reversing out because they were only one-off. So in terms of incremental budgeting, that's how it's identified. So we looked at a number of scenarios. A low scenario, you know, if things are really, really getting better, lower inflation, and we're able to contain our demand pressures, then actually we could be looking at a much smaller gap that we would have to fill. A central scenario, which I call a more realistic scenario, because it takes into account that we actively tackle the challenges that we're seeing and that we actively take action to prevent some of those demographics happening in the way that we see them. So I call it, you know, we profile the do nothing scenario. What are our responses to that? And how do we flex so that we're changing our strategies to demand so that it doesn't come to fruition in the way that we're seeing, whether it be unit cost or actual numbers, we're doing what we can to prevent that happening. And a worse view, the high view is the worst view. It could be even worse, but I use that as one of the scenarios. There are infinite scenarios with a medium-term financial strategy, but I've used these 3. So a worse view on inflation, it starts to go up. The council's ability to manage demand and indeed manage the in-year position, all having an impact on where we are. Now, I've chosen to recommend the central scenario because I think it's the more realistic scenario, and it gives us some provision should we not be able to respond quick enough to some of the pressures that we're seeing, but also it recognises that we need to be actively doing something. Now, the net change in that scenario is a £15.1 million reduction in the budget gap. That's a net. There are lots of provisions that I've made going in, as well as reducing down some provisions. Within table 3, you can see all of the incremental changes that are happening to each of those years, including adding on the 5th year of 2029-30. And if I refer members to Appendix A, which is on page 73, you can see what provision you are essentially agreeing to being in the medium-term financial plan. So table 3 are the movements. I've provided the column 25-26 in the previous table so that you can see that in table 1, and that will track through to the appendix where you can see the actual provision for 2025-26. For each of the other years, I haven't provided the comparatives, but they are in the public domain as part of the budget report. just to track through, so why are these changes here? Inflation contractual, we'd made a provision for about £25 million that is non-contractual. We have every effort to try and manage those non-contractual obligations with providers. We can see that through the in-year position, some of our costs are coming down, and there is more that can be done there. I'm actively expecting us as an organisation to work to hold back these increases. If they're not contractual, then we do what we can to hold them back. Inflation contractual, in a completely different way, you will see that I've increased the provision, taking into account the in-year pressure that we've seen in waste in the in-year position, and made that provision because that is a contractual obligation that we will need to meet. Pay inflation, I've not changed the assumption here at all. So I've left the pay inflation at 2% of estimated pay, and I've let that go throughout the medium-term financial plan. I've not included anything for the final year, but I'm looking at that period of time and saying we'll leave it at 2%. We hope inflation will stay there. The National Pay Award has not been agreed for 2024-25 yet, so we will take that indication as to what happens in the in-year position, and if that assumption needs to be changed and amended, it will be amended as we move forward. But the provision at this point in time, given that inflation is just over 2%, we're keeping it there for now. Demographic and demand, I've removed £5 million in 25-26, and you can see that there have been demographic pressures that have been taken down. Demographic modelling is one of those things where you're predicting what's going to happen in the future, and it's very difficult to know exactly where we're going to be. But the active preventative services that we have, that we're using, and how we work to hold those demographic pressures and the eventuality of them happening is something that we are working on as an organisation. I've also stripped out of that particular item any in-year challenges that we're seeing and used them as a separate item so that we can see it transparently. The demographic and demand line is all about next year and beyond, whereas the if I take you just down in the table, rolled forward pressures is a line referring to anything that we can't control within the current financial year, or indeed any financial year that may roll forward. There are other pressures that there was a provision made for. We have enough time to be managing those other pressures and taking action to find mitigations, alternative savings to meet those. I haven't removed them completely, you will see. So I've left a provision there, but I do believe that we should be working to make that as close to zero as possible. You'll see the previously agreed savings line has been kept. There are no savings that are being proposed to reverse out here. The agreement is that everyone will be delivering the savings. There have been none that have been presented to me that can't be delivered or indeed substituted. The roll forward pressures relate to the current financial year and any financial year that may cause a roll forward pressure. I hope that that line will be zero when we're setting the budgets, but there is a provision there for the eventuality of things that can't be controlled. Capital financing, there was a question on the previous report. The capital financing here, I'm making an assumption that the capital programme will be reprofiled and pushed back, and therefore the borrowing, the revenue cost of borrowing, the capital financing element will not be required at its current level. However, you can see that I'm not withdrawing any capital programme items or an assumption about capital programme reducing at this point in time. That's something that we will look at as part of our budget setting, and I've not made any assumptions about the capital programme increasing the cost of borrowing here. It's just a reprofiling that's taken place. In terms of council to adult social care precept, I have left the adult social care precept assumption in for 25-26, but removed it for all other years. The way that I've thought about it in presentational terms is if we end up with additional pressures in adult social care coming through in that non-contractual piece with providers, when the adult social care precept, or should the adult social care precept be announced at that point in time, they should sort of match off together. And I want us to have a more realistic way of looking at things and building back in. In terms of general council tax, we're estimating a 2.99% for the first 4 years and zero in the last year. There has been no decision taken on council tax All I've done is left the previous assumptions within the medium-term financial plan as they were around council tax increases. So should we, when government announce what the referendum thresholds are, we will amend and seek agreement for the council tax that will be going in February. In table 4, you can see the comparison of the previous medium-term financial plan to the new revised, and then you can see it in the entire budget changes gap. I want to draw members' attention to the table 6, which is the analysis of saving themes. This is our response to the medium-term financial plan and gap that we have. So the financial strategy is there are a number of savings themes, budget savings themes that are here. There's a lower end range and an upper end range, and throughout the organisation we are working hard to pull savings, robust savings options that we will be delivering in year to get ahead of that 1st of April. We've spoken about reserves briefly in the previous report. There's a reserves table in table 7, page 68, which gives you transparently what our reserves are, and also what we're forecasting to draw down from reserves in the in-year position. It's really important to flag that any further forecast overspend that is to land at the end of the financial year will deplete reserves further, and we need to take every action not to be in that position. Equally, you can see in paragraph 24 the current balance of the DSG deficit and the impact that would have, detrimental impact that would have on our reserves should the override not be continued by government, or indeed a permanent solution found by government to deal with the deficit that we have. There are a number of financial and risk implications that are included. You'll see within the main parts of this section, I draw on the section 25 statement from the previous section 151 officer and make reference to the fact that the financial emergency was declared to avoid section 114 notice. We continue to work very hard, and this framework that we're going to be working to now will enable us to work to a more sustainable, financially resilient budget in February. At this point in time, you'll see that I haven't included any one-off funding, either from reserves or any future capitalisation directive, because we are working as an organisation not to be in that position. We will have to assess whether we have actually got everything over the line as we get closer to that time. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Maria. Any questions? Sarah?
Yes, a couple of things. I just wanted to point out to people that one of the uncertainties is the level of the living wage, which the government will set, and indeed when they're going to do that. It might be interesting for people to know that 75% of what we spend on placements is spent on wages, in fact. So it's a huge part of our budget, as well as the figure of 90% paid for people in care, direct payments, and the other thing. Yes, domiciliary care. Yes, sorry. So that's where it all goes, because people are always asking these questions. My question was, and I'm sorry if I'm being terribly ignorant here. In Appendix A, which I now can't get to come up on my computer, I couldn't see where the sale of the commercial investment properties comes in as being, I mean, does it, I always understood it saved us from having to draw down on the capitalisation direction if we do it properly, but I can't see it shown anywhere as being important, which it obviously is. So I just wondered if you could explain how that fits in.
So that will hit our in-year position. So we've got capital financing that we have made provision for, financing it using borrowing with the premium on PWLB, Public Works Loans Board, which is where we take out the majority of our borrowing. When we sell those assets, they will come in and we will see capital financing reduce in the current financial year. There is no capitalisation directive that has been factored in for 25-26, as I've said, so there's no one-off funding that I've included there, whether it's a capitalisation directive or changing use of reserves. Equally, I haven't made provision to increase reserves either. So the question that you're asking me will affect the in-year position. And then we could reduce down our capital financing requirement in a future year. But until those sales happen, I don't want to count that money yet.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments from league members or associate league members, so I will go to Mandy first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the paper. I think we all understand that the longer you try to predict ahead, the more unpredictable it becomes. So I think if any of us tried to work out our finances for 5 years' time, I think we would struggle with that. So so we've had a good go at it here in this paper. So my first question, the low, the central and the high, that's predicated, a good part of that, whilst not all of it, is on a lower, a realistic or a worse view of inflation. Now we know there are pressures on inflation even as we sit here with the sort of cost of heating and fuel going up, and we've got worldwide challenges which could again affect our inflation in the UK. So my question is, what figure have you used for a low, what for a central and what for a high? In other words, if we saw inflation at 3.5% on your scale of low, central and high, where would that fall? Because I'm trying to get, as time moves forward, whether we're actually central is right or whether it's gone too high to still be central. So I haven't got a figure in there, so I don't know what your low, central and high figures are. That's my first question.
So in terms of, it's not just inflation, it's our ability to hold pressures. In my scenario planning for the medium term financial strategy. So in terms of inflation, there is no change to the low scenario on inflation at all. It matches the central scenario exactly, which is around the 2.5%. But the higher inflation makes an assumption that inflation will increase slightly by about 1%. So it's not going back up to those double digits inflations. That's why I said it could be even worse. It's just a spectrum that we're looking at. It's mainly around our ability to manage demographic pressures, manage our in-year position, and indeed what our capital financing may look like. So Councillor Wakefield's question around our selling of assets to pay for the capitalisation directive, when that happens, that there's a low scenario that picks that up. I just haven't kept that in the central scenario here because I want to be in a position where we've got that for certain before we actually start to count those.
Thank you. And it's really, really difficult reading this to work out, you know, if it goes 1% higher, what effect sort of will that have within how you've presented it? I think that's difficult, and how much of it is inflation and how much is demand. So I was struggling because we're looking at a £50 million swing there between that low and high. It's a colossal figure, and I'm trying to understand if inflation did move and there's a huge amount of volatility there, we've already seen it, you know, how that would impact this paper really. So I'll leave it there, but I'm hoping we can have some more detail on that at future. Oh, far away.
I tried not to make the report too complicated so that we could flow through, because there were a number of changes. But actually, when we present the February budget, there will be a medium-term financial strategy written document that will accompany it with those sensitivity analysis within there. Because even when we set the budget, we won't know what inflation is going to be for the year ahead. We will have that uncertainty. But the 1% movement of the threshold, those sensitivity analysis will include, so that we have that context.
Thank you. I suppose devil's in the detail, and perhaps that's what I was looking for a little bit more. So the next question is around pay inflation at 2%. I suppose, is that realistic? We have heard that they haven't got this year's bottomed out yet. If we find that this year's is much more than that, that's immediately going to impact on this sort of forward plan. So will this be changed if it settles higher this year?
So we currently have provision, I think, for about 4% in 24-25. that's the watching space. So if 4% is sufficient to deal with the in-year position, whatever the workforce looks like, because it depends on what our workforce is as well, that's only an estimate, and it depends on whether the settlement is goes more towards is balanced towards a higher amount to the lower paid staff than it is across the board. Sometimes it's exactly the same across the board. Sometimes there is that additional bit at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of pay. We will monitor and see if it's more and we need to make an additional provision, then I will pick that up as to how we're modelling the medium-term financial strategy and plan. So we'll have to make those changes accordingly. But we have had times where 2%, 2.5% has been sufficient, and that's what's been paid when inflation has been low. So we just need to watch that space.
Thank you. My last question really is around this £16 million inflation non-contractual to work to hold back increases. I'm struggling with that a little because every business in this country will have seen increases in their running costs, whether it's in salaries, whether it's in heating, etc., etc. And I feel as if that's a stretch target personally, but I will wait to see. So I'm trying to, I suppose, gauge the accuracy and the reality perhaps of some of what's here. Only time will tell, but I think there are some stretched figures in it, and I'll leave my comments there.
Okay, thank you. I've got Lucy next.
Thank you, Chair. So I noticed on page 68 that we're going through the budgets, the reserves, sorry, at quite a high rate. And I noted that you mentioned earlier that obviously we would need to be in an underspend scenario to be able to add to those reserves. And I'm wondering which is going to come first, the underspend or the nothing left in reserves. And also I wondered how our reserves compared to other similar councils. And I've got an additional question about the pay inflation. So we're looking at page 73 and page 66, the two tables there. The pay inflation, I just want to understand, obviously we've got a lot of redundancies to come. Are we going to, although we're looking at an inflation on a figure, is that the current figure or is that the figure once we've made those redundancies, please?
Okay, I'll start with the reserves questions. So in the report, these are, so we already balanced the budget using the nearly £40 million. So there's that first bit of what's coming out of those reserves in that table. But also there are some other reserves that have been factored into being used for specific items that are there. We've got them there. We know that we're going to use them for that specific thing, unlike the nearly 40 million that is general use, because we didn't have a specific, it was about balancing the budget, and we want to avoid that at all costs. Earmarked reserves are there for a specific purpose. They will be spent on those specific purposes, but it's down to us to ensure that we replenish reserves to ensure that the financial resilience and sustainability of this council continues to be in a good position. So that's just the prediction. If we were to balance our outturn, there wouldn't be a movement on reserves any further. But if we were to come in underspent and we didn't need some of that contingency, then at the end of the financial year, we could top up our reserves. And we have that ability to do that. Where do we compare with organisations like ours? I think we're probably at the lower end of the spectrum, which is why we're in this which is why we declared a financial emergency. The point that we need to manage now is not to deplete reserves any further, to be in a position where we hold that, we manage to set a robust balanced budget in a sustainable way. So we're not drawing on one-offs to balance that budget. And your other question about pay inflation, this is pay inflation at 2% of what the current pay bill is. So it could become more as the workforce changes. But I haven't made that assumption. I've just left it exactly as the provision that was made previously, and we will review that as we're moving through, as we have the outcome of the National Pay Agreement, and as we review what our workforce is moving forward.
Councillor Diego Rodriguez.
Thank you, Bill. Just one question. One of the recommendations in the report is for the exec to agree that the council continues operating as if a section 114 notice has been issued. So my question to the section 151 officer is, does she believe that there is absolutely nothing else that this council could be doing to avoid that section 114?
Well, I can see that we don't have mitigations for all services across the board, which is why we keep making reference to that. And I know that it's difficult in some areas, but then we're looking for other areas to go further. We are also reviewing all of our pressures or forecast overspends that we're seeing, both in a one-off and an ongoing context. So I want to isolate what is one-off that will only happen this year, that once this year is over, it won't happen again. Yes, we need to deal with it, and yes, we need to manage it for sure. But anything that's ongoing has an impact on next year's budget, not just our in-year position. And I want to isolate that so we can have those actions now so that we can rectify the position so we don't have those roll forward pressures line that I've included. I believe that there are a number of actions that we're taking across the council. And I want to see us take those actions to the fullest that we can. So it's not just about mitigating actions, it's what are we doing around de-escalating placements, what are we doing around placement costs and commissioning, what are we doing about, because we've got the controls in place around the spend control boards, but I want to know what else we're doing that affects the more longer term. The review of the capital programme is happening at the moment. We have a number of actions that we are taking. I will come back to you as part of the monthly reports to say whether I think we're on the right track or not, because that's my responsibility here.
Councillor Redmond, good morning, mate.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's a couple of just very quick points, really. One for myself, I acknowledge in paragraph 24, the 151 officer recognises the risk of the DSG, designated school grant, it can have on the council. It's something that my own scrutiny committee have picked up, and we've asked to drill down. So that's an acknowledgement. That the main reason I put my hand up in relation to this, the strategy is very clear and it makes a number of points, but specifically in paragraph 27, when you talk about the 25-26 budget preparation, the proposals that are being considered will come to the appropriate scrutiny committees. I'm putting my all scrutiny hat on now and ask more generally that we can remember the fact that the earlier any proposals or changes are brought to scrutiny, the more opportunity that scrutiny committee will have to look at them and be able to feed them in. I'm very conscious that early in January we're likely to have a big bundle of papers come forward that contains lots and lots of things. So my comment is a plea, really, that you could make sure that you would perhaps remind executive heads that the earlier they can bring their proposals to scrutiny, the more opportunities scrutiny can have to help and understand and to bring those forward. So the request is, do you think it would be reasonable for you to include the request that all scrutiny committees are given the opportunity to look at proposals at the earliest opportunity?
Yes, I think that's sensible. And from my perspective, I want to see these proposals being implemented during the financial year so that when we set the budget in February, and indeed when we come to the 1st of April, they're already delivered. We're not tracking the delivery of these savings. We get on with the following financial year. So what we're doing is we're using the current financial year to get ahead. So yes, absolutely.
And David.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I just want to follow up on Diego's question, really, which was, do you believe that everything's been done that could mitigate? And it was quite a long answer, so I'm just trying to find out the crux of what you were saying there. And you talked about a lot of things that were being done. What other things would you like to see being done? I suppose is the question that Diego was asking, and I didn't hear the answer to that one.
So I want to see the mitigating actions identified and then implemented as management actions with the forecast outturns coming down. That's what I want to see across the in-year position. And I think what we may need to do is create a structure around that to help focus our attention using the finance business partners and the particular service directorate that has a forecast overspend to work together to recover the position. So more emphasis on the recovery of the position and what we're doing about it. There are lots of corporate actions that we've put in across the piece that will impact lots of different areas of the council, and indeed give us the opportunity of rectifying the financial position in year where a particular service can't quite get down to a balanced position. But I want to see every service get as close to that as possible.
Thank you. And Francis online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, absolutely. I, of course, we want to get everybody to the right place, and the right place is not spending money we haven't got, obviously. But we're back to the one council bit. It can't be done service by service. For example, as we were told at Children's Scrutiny a week or two ago, the only way that the planning service can support children in producing the more Homes and Horizons homes, which will be absolutely necessary to deal with spend, quite apart from the fact that the children desperately need them. The only way we can do that is by subbing the planning department the cost of somebody to deal with the planning applications. Now, so of course that's showing as an extra bit of spend for children, a saving not being made through Homes and Horizons, but it just absolutely, for me, says it can't be done service by service. It's got to be a whole council approach. And I would again ask for reassurance that that's where we're going. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've had this comment a few times about being working together. I think we're all very, very clear that the council's an entity. Children's services won't succeed if the rest of the council isn't there working lockstep with children's services. Adult services, we already had the feedback in the peer review. The defence said adult services doing a really good job. How is the rest of the council helping it? How are we working together? We're very, very clear we need to make the council work together across all aspects, because none of the individuals we're supporting exist in a microcosm. They're all people. They don't just become clients of a particular service. They're people who live in Somerset who we need to help across all parts of their life. And we do lots of things that support people, regardless of what services they do or don't use. So I don't think the concern is something that I would hold. It is hard work to make sure services all work together. All of the managers, I think, in the room would say, actually, it's a constant piece of work we've got to keep feeding and watering, because it's easy for people to do the thing that they're good at, but they need to think, actually, how do they draw their partners in? How do we draw system partners in across the wider NHS footprint, voluntary sector and everyone else? That's all part of the same picture. So when we talk about our finances, we have to get our finances stable, because that underpins the work we're doing across all of our services. If we don't have stable finances, services can't plan ahead. They can't work out what their partnerships look like. They can't work out how to deliver. If we can get the finances stable, then we can make sure that services know what their budgets are going forward. That's when we can take that piece of worry and work away from people, and they can start thinking about, how do I work better with my colleagues? How do I work better with our partners? How do we work better with our communities? So that is part of that wider transformation picture. And it's fair to say, I think all councils would recognise, bringing 5 councils together, quite clearly, everyone was not working hand in glove to start with, because they were different organisations with different priorities. It will take us some time to finish that piece of work, but it's absolutely something that I think Councillor Nicholson quite rightly flags up as being something we've got to focus on. It is absolutely something we are focused on. We work quite hard on.
I would just say that the previous report in paragraph 12 highlighted a number of actions that we're taking as a council. So we're not identifying specific directorates, but I just make the reference that anyone that is overspending is a focus for us and needs to be.
Not seeing any other members indicating, so we'll move to the recommendations to approve the medium-term financial strategy for 25-26 to 29-30, and to agree the council continues with the aim of avoiding a section 114 by taking all the necessary actions and continue to operate as if one had been issued. Can I see proposer, please? Councillor Leishon, seconded by Councillor Shearer. All those in favour, please. All those against. That's clearly carried. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is the HRA sewage treatment tank replacements using MHCL G, Local Nutrient Mitigation Fund grants, which is on pages 75 to 92. And I'm hoping that Federica Smith-Roberts is expecting to introduce this item.
Yep, I'm happy to introduce this item, Bill. Every day is a learning day for me, and I didn't ever think I would be talking about sewage treatment plants, but here we are today. So you've got the executive summary in front of you in the papers, and the fact that the HRA, so that's across both the north and the west of the county, that we manage 20 packaged sewage treatment plants, and they serve rural homes, and many of these sewage treatment plants are coming to the end of their lifespan. And so what we are looking to do is take that £1 million of funding that we've received via MHCLG and use it to upgrade those plants so that we will be able to reduce the amount of phosphate that's being discharged into both the River Tone and Parrett catchment areas. This has been through lots of different members for sign-offs. Questions have been raised in relation to why do we own them, as an example. Some of the properties are now in private ownership through the right to buy, but we do own in the HRA these treatment plants, and this is a good use of the money to help mitigate the impact that phosphate is having within those catchment areas. So we have got Shane online if there's any technical questions that are raised, but for me it's a positive move that we are now able to move this forward, because I believe this has been discussed for at least the last 18 months to 2 years to make this happen.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? I'll go to Councillor Wilkins first.
Thank you, Fed. I'm just intrigued to understand how directly the mitigations that will be put in will be directed to the phosphate issue. Would that be something that's proactively dealt with as and when these plants are put in place?
Very technical for me there, Richard, so I'm going to hand over to Shane or Chris to see Shane has the answer.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor Wren. I'm not sure if this answers your question or not, but what, in terms of the phosphate credits, sorry, were you talking about the actual how they're going to be allocated, or are you talking about how they're going to be created?
A very technical question for myself. I'm just keen that any mitigation that we do achieve is instantly accounted for in our phosphate issues. I think for what I'm trying to ask.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I get you now. So with this arrangement in regard to replacing the HRA tanks, we are actually selling credits to our colleagues within the climate team. And then I've got to say that I don't know how those credits are then sold or prioritised on the market. I don't know what their mechanism is in regards to their contact then with planning, etc., and developers in terms of getting those credits sold. We are just, if you like, we are just being procured to produce those credits and getting that funding for it, and then we are passing those credits on to our colleagues in the climate change team. So I can't answer that question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. But from your point of view, when are those credits passed on to the climate team? How quickly?
So those credits will be passed on once the actual projects themselves are actually as and when they are completed. So this project's going to be monitored by our colleagues in the climate team. So we're going to be progressing these replacements throughout next financial year, I would say, and looking to get in contract this financial year.
Thank you. Chris, I believe you can add to that.
So I can't give the specifics of how they're being allocated. What I will say, as soon as they are made available, they are for the benefit of Somerset because they have to be used within the correct catchment area. So they go into the council-wide response to the phosphate issue. Exactly how they're then managed in the planning function and allocated to planning applications, I can't answer, but we can get a response for you. But they do benefit Somerset as a whole because they have to go into the same catchment area.
Sarah?
Yes, I think some of the councillors will know that the phosphate credits are being allocated through the planning team to the planning permissions that have been held up in an order that they've settled on, which I think is a sensible one. I think they did the smallest ones first, but they've now got more credits coming through, and they are doing them in a recognised order, which I think people in the community hopefully understand, or those who know about them. I just also wanted to mention, just because I thought councillors might find this interesting, I was contacted by somebody in one of my villages who I know about a credit stream rather like this, which is being run privately by a firm called WCI. They'd contacted her, or she'd been put in touch with them. They're going to replace her septic tank, which is old and not working very well, with a new one, rather like we're doing. And they will then take the phosphate credits and sell them into the marketplace. So she brought it round because, bless her, she just had no idea what it was about. She didn't understand the letter that had been sent from a solicitor, which included an agreement with Somerset Council, a unilateral undertaking, which is a bit like a Section 106 agreement that she'd had to sign, and they wanted to make some changes to it. But I think the point is that this is going on privately as well. So I just wanted to make the point, it's not just Somerset Council that's doing this. It's quite a big effort. So septic tanks do block up, the soakaways block up, they become very well, not exactly dangerous, but certainly very unpleasant, and they can be dangerous at times. So this effort to change them to modern plants, which my understanding is has an electricity supply, put clean water into a local stream, but actually take out more phosphates and are a better system. And Shane can correct me if I'm wrong about the electricity, but I think they're like Clargesters, really, or that sort of thing. And it is going on across Somerset and presumably across the rest of the country, but taking out the phosphates element of it or increasing that is very welcome and is what we're looking for as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And particularly interesting to explain to residents why in Broomfield, why some residents apply and some don't, because the water goes into different catchment areas, and those that goes into the Parrot catchment it doesn't apply to. Those that go into the Tone catchment it does apply to. It is somewhat a confusing system from the residents' point of view, but it is good to see that we are being able to deliver it on our stock. I'm not seeing any other leads. Oh, sorry, Liz.
I just wanted to check, if I may please, with Shane on timescale of the commitment of the local nutrient mitigation funding. So the £1 million that's referenced here, I believe there is a tight timescale against that, and that all of that money needs to be committed within, is it this 24-25 year? So by the end of next March, it needs to be committed. So are we confident that we can move this quickly enough, please?
So talking to my colleagues in planning who are climate change, who are administering the scheme, their definition of commitment has been that where we are in contract to get the works done. And I'm confident that we can achieve that. I'd say there is some risk at that, but there's ways of mitigating it in terms of how we go out to tender for the works, whether we go out to tender on a sort of design and build basis. But I'm confident that we can still achieve that. But they've also recently informed me that actually approval today could well constitute committing to the spend. So if this is my understanding is it's possible that as of today we could already have achieved the milestone. I understand that Section 151 officer is being asked to look into that and to comment on whether or not that constitutes achieving the milestone of committed spend.
Are you able to comment at this stage or not yet? Not yet. Okay, well you have some homework. Excellent. I think I've got Mandy next.
Thank you. We're living in a whole new world, aren't we? If we had a conversation about this 10 years ago, no one would have known what we were talking about. So just a couple of points of clarity for me. I absolutely welcome it. You know, anything that can be improved and help this has to be a positive thing. So, but just a couple of questions. So this funding came from MHCLG. I was just wondering, was it bid for or what did it arrive? And the reason I ask that is presumably there's going to be a whole host of these privately owned around Somerset. So, you know, if that's the case, can we bid for some more to get some more of our homes improving this? And the secondly is around this transparency around holding or selling these credits. I think it is a big market, it's an emerging market, and I think it'd be really good for us all to understand quite transparently, are we holding them, are we selling, and if so, what sort of money we're potentially making from it, because I think it's a whole new area that we're not probably fully sighted on at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to take this if I may, because I think it goes a little bit beyond purely the paper put forward by Shane. So Shane's come to us today to seek approval to spend effectively £1 million of the overall allocation on a specific scheme. I think the question's being posed are potentially a bit wider than that. So I'd have to get a written answer to you in terms of whether we bid or were allocated the overall 9.6, because I just can't remember. In terms of how it's managed, the planning service are looking, and there is a paper that was brought to executive, I forget the exact date, but there was a paper that's come through executive identifying the allocations of that 9.6 million, and therefore there is a range of schemes being put forward on that. The credits themselves then feed into the planning system, and there is again an approved paper that identifies how they will be prioritised. So there are various schemes on hold within the planning service whereby the phosphate mitigation is the last remaining matter to be discharged, and there's a priority order system in place there for applications that are blocked. So we can get you a more detailed response. Sorry, Mandy, talking to away from you, but that's in terms of today, this is just about the approval of one of those schemes within the overall allocation.
Okay, Duncan, I believe you have a bit more of an answer.
Just say we applied for the funding. It wasn't given to us in that sense. We actually, I won't say bid because I'm not sure it was a bid in that sense, but the number of authorities across the country are able to apply for the funding, which we did, and we secured a good allocation. As Chris has rightly outlined, there's a proposal about how we're spending that. Yes, these will go back in and generate value. I won't say we're selling because, as Chris has outlined, there's a process by how they're allocated, but that's how the value generates back into the system effectively. And this is us trying to work with the market. So we're working with people in the balance of funding who are doing other things to try and generate phosphate credits that developers can then use. That's how that money flows around the whole system, not just this element. So this is effectively the council doing exactly as Councillor Wakefield outlined what other private sector providers are doing to try and generate phosphate credits, which can then be applied to developments. There will be a financial transaction between the developer to purchase the credits. That's through some existing schemes. So within there, the reason that we want to get involved in that is A, because it's a really good thing to do for our tenants and for the environment and for Somerset. But B, there are a number of smaller developers who would maybe struggle to be involved in some of the larger phosphate credit schemes, and because of the nature of the commitment and so on. So we do need to make sure we're supporting all developers to be able to move their developments forward, not just the very large ones.
Hey, I've now got Will online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as Fed mentioned in her introduction, there have been various questions about this, and since the decision came past me as Chair of Community Scrutiny, I had a look at it. The interesting thing is, I mean, one of the things that intrigued me was our level of responsibility to these plants, particularly with the selling off of council homes over the last few decades. And I asked for some figures. Now, the figures here say that we have 17, this is only for Somerset West and Taunton, I haven't got the Sedgemoor ones. There are 17 former Somerset treatment works. Of those 17 treatment works, there are 97 homes, of which 70 are privately owned and 27 are still HRA rented properties. Of the 17 sites, I think it's 4 of them we own no properties at all, and 2 of these are the subject of this decision. And of 4 or more, I think we've got another 4 or 5, we've only owned 1 property on them. So my interest was piqued simply because of our ongoing responsibility in areas like this where our interest, shall we say, as property owner is reducing. So as I say, the 2 in this particular decision, I think it's Meadowside and Homefield, we own no properties at all. What I haven't been able to understand yet is what our level of responsibility is to provide the services, such as sewage treatment, that were signed up to when we sold the properties originally. And that's one of the things I would like the community scrutiny to be looking at, because I think, as the point was made in the report, by obtaining the subsidy reduces the financial impact on the HRA and its 30-year business plan. But actually, if we're going to be spending some of this money on property that we don't need to, on sewage treatment works we don't need to, then we should be reallocating the money somewhere else. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to follow this up with Chris Hall and others when we have a pre-community scrutiny meeting in the next couple of weeks. But and there is a wider question here about various maintenance on council estates, that kind of thing, and whether we are able to, or whether we are recouping the costs that we put in on a pro rata basis for other houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyl. There are various people who've waved at me with a possible response to it. I'm aware that you want to bring it to scrutiny. Anyone want to briefly respond here? Go on, Fed.
Gwyl, you've raised a really good point. I think I had similar thoughts when I saw some of those figures. I think ultimately some of it is down to whether water providers or utility providers want to take on assets when they are only, serving a small number of households, and I don't believe that they do. But again, it's something maybe for scrutiny to take a look at. My understanding is that there should be charging involved in relation to the properties that then receive the benefit of having those. But again, we can have a look at that through scrutiny to make sure that that is happening and that's being worked forward. Because I think when I look at my water bill, I pay both a sewage rate and like a rate for fresh and clean water, so I would hope that that is similar for these properties, but again, I think as you peel the onion, it's probably for scrutiny to look into that, and then also then to see what does the future look like and ask those questions of Wessex Water.
Thanks, Fed. The charges we levy are between £123 a house to 262, but I don't know what those figures are based on, and that's one of the things I think we need to look at.
Great. I'll look forward to unpeeling that onion.
Unpeeling the onion.
At scrutiny, and that's Charlotte. David.
Thank you very much indeed. I was going to ask a very similar question. I was struggling to understand what a packaged sewage treatment plant was, or certainly what packaged sewage was, but it's become clearer during the conversation. And the reason I'm just speaking is because I actually know Homefield. It's actually in my village, and it's although it's only 2 miles from the centre of Taunton, it's actually very remote, and you can't connect it to the services, and that's why this was obviously built. And it's obviously a legacy treatment plant which was there at the time and still is. So actually, I do think unless we've made some other legal provision in the sale of those properties, we do have a responsibility, and this seems like a really good idea, and I fully support it. I think that it's a good way to spend £1 million and get the system upgraded and to get some carbon, some neutrality offset as well. Good, I fully support it.
Okay, thank you, and I look forward to hearing all about that coming up at scrutiny. Okay, shall we move? I don't think there's any other hands that I'm waiting for. Maria, I need to come back to you.
Thank you. Just to say, given that this is funded by grants, so we don't have to change Treasury Management Strategy, we just need to take it to Council for approval to add to the capital programme.
Does that mean we need to amend the recommendation? So on the second bullet point, we are doing a drafting amendment of recommend to full council. Is that acceptable as a drafting amendment? Okay. So accepting that in, we've got substantive, so can we have a proposer and seconder? Proposed by Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. Those in favour, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. And we've got item 9, the annual approval as sole shareholder of Homes in Sedgemoor 24-25. And pass over to Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts again.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep this short. You will see in the executive summary that we are the sole member, which is the equivalent to a shareholder of Homes in Sedgemoor. This is their accounts, and we're being asked to approve them for the 2023-24 period. You will see in the appendix the covering statement from Paul Stevenson, their chair, and I think that gives a really good overview of the incredible work that they've done over that period, how we've looked to work together, and how what the future looks like for them. You will note as well that actually at point 2 that we appoint 3 members, but we deal with that through our outstanding bodies list, which is what Liz carefully looks at for us and tries to pull everything together. And in the recommendations, we need to appoint or reappoint Bishop Fleming as the auditors. That has been procured over a several-year period, but we need to reappoint or make that decision today. I'll hand over to Chris if there's anything in particular that Chris wants to add.
Very little actually, so thank you. This is a paper that comes to us on an annual basis, and our position as the sole shareholder effectively. So financial performance for Homes in Sedgemoor has been strong. They're managing to operate within the management agreement amount set, which obviously creates stability for the HRA 30-year business plan. So there's no immediate risk being identified in your approval of any of this. As we say, the accounts themselves have already been via the Homes in Sedgemoor board, as you would expect. So that board operates with member representation on it, and we are seeking sign off of the previous year's accounts and then appointment of Bishop Fleming for 24-25. I did just want to draw your attention, if I may, to page 96. There's a minor error on that page, so the risk score for projected risk has been accidentally overstated. It should say a risk score of 3. It says a risk score of 6. It's just a calculation error, I'm afraid. So other than that, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Thank you. Any comments from lead members or associate lead members? Sarah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see this coming forward. I gather it's an annual thing. I thought, I've heard in some of other meetings we've been in that Homes in Sedgemoor are actually providing some support for our own HRA in the Somerset Western Taunton region as well. So I think they're doing quite well. I'm also delighted to be going to their annual, or I think biennial, Star Awards next week. So I'm looking forward to speaking to some of the people there as well. And with this approved, I think I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Andy.
Thank you. Just a very quick question, really. It's just a bit of a processy one, really. My understanding was that it was delegated to the audit committee to actually agree all accounts for the council. And I know it hasn't been to scrutiny or anywhere. I just wondered why it doesn't go to audit and why it comes here. And I didn't know the answer to that. So perhaps somebody can help me.
Thank you. Because they have their own audit set up effectively. So we're not auditing in that sense, we're the shareholder. So their own auditors and their own audit committee deal with their auditing. We are the shareholder, so we're looking at the results of their process rather than duplicating their process ourselves. I understand that's the position because I think I sat last year.
Just to come back, you're actually approving the accounts. So it's not about the auditing, it's about the approval of, which is a slightly different thing.
Yeah, it's the approval as the shareholder.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. So proposed Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts, seconded Councillor Wakefield. Those in favour of the recommendations and those against, and that's clearly carried. And please note that the next meeting of the executive will be on Monday, November the 4th, and will again be here in the John Meikle room at Dean House. And there being no other business, I call the meeting to a close. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for all papers and reports presented.